Workers' compensation cases can be very complicated. We have learned that for sure. We've been talking about them all month, but we actually have a few more tips that you should know if you intend to file. Catherine Stone from Barbas Law is back to walk us through and kind of wrap up and share your final tips on workers' comp. Thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, again, we have learned so much, and I know that we're just kind of dusting the surface.
Yeah, there's so much with regards to workers' compensation and the little nuances and how things can go and the little things that you need to look at. One of the first things when a client comes in is, I know for a lot of clients it's all about the money. They've had an accident, they're not being able to work because they've got restrictions, and they're wondering how they're going to pay their bills. And unfortunately, in the work comp system, you get paid at a reduced rate from what your regular salary would have been or your regular wages would have been. And so they calculate that by taking the 13 weeks prior to your accident and coming up with an average to determine what we call your average weekly wage. Well, and then they calculate the benefits from that. Every time a client comes in the office, one of the first things we ask them is, were you working for any other employer for that 13 weeks prior to that accident? Because we can go pull those wages and we can get a carrier to include those wages as concurrent employment. And what that does is, if you did have another job at the time that you got hurt, we're going to be able to include those and make your average weekly wage higher. And that's something that employers may not ask you about, your adjuster may not ask you about, you may not know to offer that information, but it's very significant because we're talking about money here.
When you started bringing up concurrent employment, I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be bad for the person. No, it's actually a good thing.
It's actually a good thing, yes. I mean, because it's going to increase what they could potentially make as a result of that.
You know, and if you are in this situation and you're in workers' comp, quitting the job, not the smartest option?
It depends. If you voluntarily quit your job while you're on workers' compensation and you have restrictions, but your employer has offered to accommodate those restrictions, or you're totally off work and you just decide, you know what, I'm done with that job, I'm not going back. There is a defense that they can use that you have voluntarily limited your income if they've offered you a job and you quit that job. And so it's always very important that, I would say, contact our office and make sure what you're doing is right before you do it, because it could affect your money benefits. And again, going back to the whole financial aspect, because there's two aspects to every workers' comp case. It's the medical and the financial. And so quitting your job could have an effect on the money aspect. Quitting your job isn't going to stop your case. They still have to provide you with medical treatment, even if you're no longer with the employer, but it could affect your financial benefits.
So you're talking about voluntarily quitting your job. What about voluntarily refusing a job assignment or an added something to your job?
Well, that's the same thing. If your employer, again, you come in with restrictions from the doctor, let's say you were out in a plant working, but now you can only do a sedentary sit-down job, and your employer comes in and says, that's okay, I've got a shredder over here, you can sit down and shred paper all day. And you sit there and say, I don't want to shred paper all day, that's not my job, I want to be home. Well, the employer at that point, if they were going to pay you and try to keep you up with your salary, and you refuse to at least attempt that job or do that job, then the carrier can cut you off and deny you any benefits if your wages fall below a certain level. And so it's always, again, very important that before you do anything with regards to dealing with the employer about your work, whether it's voluntarily resigning or refusing an offer of employment, contact our office and get an assessment as to whether or not that's your best option.
Wow, that is a great way to end, Catherine. I really appreciate it, and we way to tie everything up on the workers' comp. Basically, get a lawyer like yourself on the side. I think that's what we've all learned. And if you have any questions about about your rights, just give them a call at 1-800-BARBAS-LAW, or just go to barbaslaw.com/knowyourrights. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.